Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. We're honored to be here. My name's Don Reynolds, and I'm the head of Capital Markets Group and a member of the Blockchain and FinTech Initiative at Wyrick, Robbins, Yates & Ponton. We're an entrepreneurial law firm focused on working with growth companies. We're very interested and active in this space, and just glad to be here. More importantly, I want to introduce Jason Williams here. Jason is a pretty impressive guy. In addition to being one of the smartest people around, I'd venture he might be the most physically fit guy in the room. He's got a long entrepreneurial history. He started out after getting bored with college and dropping out of a fine Ivy League institution. He started a company called FastMed to address a gap in the market for retail-based medical services. That company grew rapidly. It won all kinds of prizes, a couple of Fast 50 awards, including number 1 one year, number 4 one year. That's right. Ended up being the number 2, second largest privately owned urgent care company in the country. Yep. And sold it to private equity. Yep. Went off and did some other things, wrote some patents. Yep. The current company is PRTI, which recycles tires into their components. And this is sort of what brought Jason to Bitcoin and crypto and so forth. Was that business, PRTI, actually generates energy from the components of the tires. And I understand you started using some of that energy to mine crypto.
Yeah, if I back up a little bit,
yeah.
You know, I guess my first experience with cryptocurrency was a marketing guy named Will Basham who came into my office back in late 2012, 2013. Name dropped Tyler Winklevoss. You know, I switched off immediately and made my first mistake actually in cryptocurrency. A few years later, a guy you may know as Pomp, Anthony Pompliano, it's just Pomp, like Kobe.
Yeah.
Pomp.
One name.
One name. We were going to check on a portfolio company in Charlotte, and this was a few years ago. And Pomp is a very intelligent guy, and he kind of drops into a rabbit hole on things. So he was driving, and I was listening for 3 hours as he pined about cryptocurrency and where he thought the market was going. And over that kind of 5-hour drive, we both arrived at the fact that we could harness some of the power we were producing at the startup I was running, PRTI, which essentially does take waste tires, whole car tires, we put them through a thermal demanufacturing process that throws off a ton of power. It's about 1.8 megawatts of power continuously that I would historically have sold to the grid for about 4.5 cents a kilowatt hour. We decided to build a cryptocurrency mine and throw that power into running those rigs. So in essence, we laid claim to the first waste-to-energy cryptocurrency mine. When we first started, we probably had 45 rigs running. Each rig had 6 graphics cards. We were mining like 8 Ethereum a day.
Yeah.
So those of you who are mining, that's pretty extraordinary. You may have 1,000 graphics cards running in line right now and mine 2 or 3 Ethereum a day. So I didn't mean to go too far off, but that's really my first experience with cryptocurrency.
Very cool. And I understand that as that developed and grew, you've had some interesting experiences with regulators and law enforcement authorities. Tell us about the time the FBI showed up.
Yes, I mean, when you guys see John McAfee acting insane, and you know, I don't know if you follow him in social networks, but or even if you know who he is, this stuff does really happen. I was at work in September of last year, and my wife texts me and says the FBI's at the house. You know, that's not something you hear very often. So I say, well, send me their card. I call the FBI agent back, and he's like, look, we want to talk with you. And I'm like, okay, what's this about? And they won't tell me. So I say, I'll meet you at Dunkin' Donuts, in like 15 minutes. And, you know, so I haul butt over there. And at that point, I had a big beard, camo hat on, Ray-Bans. I was at work. And two FBI agents come into Donks, show me their badge, and we sit down and
they didn't have camo hats and Ray-Bans.
No.
Maybe the Ray-Bans.
No, they
black
look
suits.
they look like what you'd think an FBI agent would look like, So I'm trying to play it cool, but the whole thing was about my purchasing of cryptocurrency rigs, my importing of hardware from China, and me doing what I typically do is build things at scale. At that point, I may have had 500 ASIC miners running, a few hundred GPU rigs running, but they were very, very interested in the activities that I was entertaining. And there's a few people here that helped me understand what I was doing. JP Barrett from the mining store, I bought some equipment from him as well. But all in all, I'm not in jail right now, and apparently I didn't do anything wrong. They were just interested in cryptocurrency and why I was buying all those computers.
Well, we're very glad you're here and not in jail.
Yeah, right.
Sure. I'm sure that was a nerve-wracking experience, and I guess what I would say as the lawyer up here, if they start reading you your rights, definitely call a lawyer. A criminal lawyer, not a corporate lawyer.
Well, I think it's an example of how nascent the industry really is and how powerful the United States kind of looking into your activities are. I mean, I'm just a guy in Raleigh with a small cryptocurrency mine.
But they found you.
But they really did find me, and they wanted to know what I was doing and had my banking records and a lot of weird stuff. So, anyway.
A lot of the regulators, I think, are behind all the people in this room in terms of where you guys are, but they are watching and they're trying to catch up. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but you just got to be careful, and you might get a scary phone call or two like Jason did.
Yep.
So talk to us a little bit about the fund. Full Tilt, I think, was the name. You got that fully invested, and now you're kind of doing Fund 2, but you've affiliated with Morgan Creek.
Right. So Pomp and I started a venture fund that was really looking at professionalizing friends and family investing. So you heard David Gardner speaking about that earlier. We had arrived at a similar thesis a few years ago and had raised about 16 million bucks, invested in 63 companies, from companies based on napkins and tech, healthcare, etc., to companies like SpaceX, Reddit, Airbnb, Lyft, we were super convicted on blockchain technologies and decided to raise another fund that was specifically focused on that space. And that's when Mark Yusko at Morgan Creek Capital gave us a call. He runs a shop in Chapel Hill. It's got about $2 billion of assets under management. And called Pomp and I into the office and really wanted to understand our philosophy around cryptocurrency, around blockchain technologies, where we saw the market going, how we avoided the early ICO investments, because we were really, I think, on the right side of the equation. We felt like a lot of them were probably not investable, maybe even fraud. So we were really talking about, at that time, digital assets and tokenized securities as being the direction we wanted to go. And I think that made sense to Mark in a big way. And Mark acquired Full Tilt Capital, and now we're putting together a fund that's specifically looking at a number of verticals. Specifically, things that are interesting to us are the infrastructure. Naturally, I've, in my career, looked to try to build into those infrastructure gaps. So you have this hospital gap between the primary care doctor and the hospital emergency room. I built urgent cares. You got this waste management situation with whole car tires polluting the earth. How do we dispose of them in a thoughtful way, recover and reapply the commodities? That's where PRTI comes in. And I see the same thing with blockchain technologies. Essentially, I can't pick the next winner, whoever is out there building the next best business. What I do want to invest in are the platforms, the protocols, the wallets, the exchanges, the pipeline, the kind of pipes in the ground, so that these guys can build businesses on top of it. So the lion's share of my work is, how do I make investments into infrastructure? Okay? Then I'm going to buy a little access into the fund managers, so your Panteras, Watching Capital, etc., and then probably have some investments in some market-weighted index.
Okay. Talk to us a little more about your views about sort of ICOs versus the tokenized securities. And I mean, it seems like there's been a lot of money raised in the ICOs and a lot of money made. Other people will talk about it as maybe feeling like we're in a bubble. Do you have any sense around that? It sounds like you lean away from the ICOs, but tell us about how you diligence that, how you avoid the fraudulent situations.
Yeah, I think David, again, I think it was David who said 90% of early stage ventures going to zero. I feel the same way about ICOs. Like a lot of them,
that's been true forever. You know, in the Silicon Valley, when they were first doing personal computers, there were a zillion clone makers.
Yeah.
And not very many of them survived.
Yeah, when I started to pressure test them under diligence, I wasn't able to find much substance. A lot of it was white papers, you know, making claims of things that that I didn't understand. And again, I'm not a genius, but again, it was just challenging. For me, digitizing assets, or STOs, security tokens, makes a lot of sense. All we're doing is taking a paper share of a real asset and placing it on the blockchain in a digital format, a programmable format. And that just blows my mind, because when you think about being able to take something that I had to manage, or Mrs. Smith or Mr. Dave had to move the paper around the file cabinet and make sure that he got proxy votes or whatever was going on with that particular share. But now I can take it, digitize it, program it, and eliminate the back office. It's a pretty amazing thing. It creates a lot of value there. So I think first stage, you know, digitizing real assets, properties, businesses that drive revenue and have EBITDA, that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, so you're looking for assets where there's some of that behind it or underneath it, and it's almost in some ways an efficiency or disintermediation play.
Yeah, and so that whole thing about disintermediation, or even the talk about decentralization, that's really hard. I mean, I was watching the launch of EOS, and it was pretty exciting. But imagine trying to organize a call, just a conference call, where there's no administrator. Nobody even knows really where the conference call is going to be, so they're serving up, maybe you get the information on Reddit or GitHub or you know, Telegram. These guys, and it was like 100, they're called block partner candidates or block producer candidates, There's about 100 block producer candidates that were working to launch EOS, and they did a really great job. They worked their tail off to organize this thing. They actually got a go vote, so that they were going to go from the test net to launch EOS. Okay, then there was another stage. They had to appoint a block producer, an appointed block producer, one person. Okay, so now you're talking about a decentralized system where somebody anonymously, some anonymous group, appoints a block producer, one person, to run the chain until they get the number of votes they need to have 21 block producers run the main network. Now that sounds really complicated.
It does.
All right? On top of that, the appointed block producer had to spend about $250,000 to buy RAM, and he didn't have the money to do it. So these guys, in this decentralized way, potentially spun up some more EOS to fund that. That doesn't sound like decentralization to me.
No.
It doesn't sound like decentralization. It sounds like there are people who are making decisions. There's a hierarchy, which is natural in humanity, right? It's any schoolyard basketball game, pickup game. Somebody's going to pick a team. I think that stuff happens. And EOS, to me, is like the biggest social experiment in the history of the universe. So it's really cool to watch.
Yeah.
It's really cool to watch.
So
we just got a couple of minutes, and I was going to say,
yeah.
And I don't know if you want to take any questions from the audience.
We're happy to. I got to admit, I can hardly see the audience, but
I was going to say, do you want to wrap? Do you have some last thoughts there, and we can take some questions?
if there are questions, let's.
I just wrap 42 seconds. The thing I'm most interested in is work in healthcare. You know, I spent 20 years of my life building healthcare businesses and dealing with HL7 interfaces and the problem with taking all the technologies that you find in a doctor's office and connecting them to an electronic medical record and getting the doctors to actually use this stuff. And I think blockchain technologies and the smart people around here have a tremendous opportunity to build in healthcare some really great solutions. And there are some great companies doing that now, but I really think healthcare is going to be improved greatly by this technology. So there it is.
Spot on.
Okay. Well, we've got the throwable microphone, so we have one question back here.
Two, actually, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. Well, one, how many of these projects do you actually see have something other than a white paper, like have some prototype, some beta, or anything before they actually start raising money?
Very few. And I'll tell you, the ones that I'm seeing have problems I've never faced before. For example, there's a company called Docademic. And I talked to Charles Nader, he's the co-founder and CEO. He's in 20 countries. He's providing free telehealth care to people. Okay? In exchange for you going on and getting free medical care, prescriptive care, he's packaging your medical data up and selling it to third parties. That's how he's funding it. Now some of you are grimacing. That's happening already. That's what happens in healthcare, but you don't benefit from it. They sell your healthcare record information anyway.
All depersonalized.
Right. It's HIPAA high tech. But think about this. This kid doesn't even have a COO. He's in 20 countries and raised $100 million. That's not the problem I have right now as a founding startup guy who raised $14 million for an industrial plant in Raleigh. Different problem. So I find a few guys like that, but a lot of them have a lot of money and no working product.
Gotcha. And my next question, part A and part B. One, do you not see the SEC really limiting innovation in the blockchain tech? And then two, I actually have an exchange that I'm just going to straight up block US users from actually buying and selling to just avoid the SEC regulation altogether. Would you still invest in a company that did something like that just to avoid regulations altogether in the US?
You know, I'm going to take a reverse position with the SEC. I'm super impressed with what they've done. I'm super impressed. I think what you heard, and it's not, they didn't make a ruling, there was just a statement that Ethereum is not a security, right? That they chose to not regulate it, that they stepped back. They're still regulating, but they chose to step back and allow this to happen. I think if the SEC clamps down on blockchain technologies in this space hard, we're going to lose ground to China and Russia in a big way and do a tremendous disservice to the United States, tech space, this whole industry. It'll be a mess.
I'll chime in on that one too, as a securities lawyer, so maybe a little biased, but I really firmly believe that of all the bureaucracies in this world, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission is actually really practical and responsive. Their first mission...
FBI sucks.
I try not to mess with the FBI. Their first mission is they're the investor's advocate, right? They are out there to protect investors. But they actually really get that to be the investor's advocate, you can't tell the investor they cannot invest their money. You just need to try to protect the investor with disclosure. We've got very much a disclosure-based system where if you follow the rules in terms of making good disclosure, you can sell your securities to everybody. We've also got a very flexible definition of security, which, maybe it reaches a lot of ICOs, and that sounds painful maybe to some people in this room, but it's actually a good thing because it's going to help to weed out fraud and allow those of you with real businesses to actually go raise some money. So there's a bureaucracy, it's there for a reason. They are pretty responsive. They're trying to, again, to catch up with all of you And I think they're getting there pretty quickly.
And I think we might have time for one more question. Anybody else raise their hand?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, thank you.
You're all set?
Yeah, well, very good. Thank you very much.
Yeah.